Recently, I rewatched the Hunger Games movies, and honestly, it just reminded me of how good and compelling the series actually was. Especially the first two films, they were extremely compelling. Granted, the second two, there was a little bit of slippage. But rewatching the series just reminded me of how quickly the teen dystopian era just came and left. The Hunger Games was the poster child for the early 2010s era of teen dystopian movies. And it just spawned off a huge wave of young adult novel adaptations that you could just not escape. If you were in high school back then, you were seeing one of these movies during your holidays. It seemed like every teen dystopian novel was getting some form of movie adaptation, and not even just a single movie, getting multiple sequels greenlit. You had the classic that was The Giver, you had the Divergent series, you had the Maze Runner series, but the hype for it died so quickly. Just as quickly as Hunger Games brought in the trend, by the time the Hunger Games series finished, the trend was basically done. This is exactly the opposite of what is the intention behind building a series. Just look at Harry Potter, Twilight, the Marvel movies. When studios go about building franchises, they're trying to build up these movies to an ultimate goal, right? You're trying to get to the Deathly Hallows, where everyone is super invested and it's a huge event for the final film. You're trying to get to Avengers Endgame, which is the culmination of multiple films. And that last movie should be the biggest box office return. It might not be the most critically acclaimed, but it should be the one that everyone's been waiting for. And that just did not happen for any of these teen dystopian movies. So I wanted to dive into what caused the popularity for this genre to just explode, and then what went wrong to make it basically evaporate. So if we go back to the early 2010s, in 2011 you had the 8th and final Harry Potter film come out, and the Twilight saga ended in 2012 after 5 films, and there definitely was a void for that teen young adult audience that just needed to be filled. And the young adult dystopian genre just arrived at the studios at that time. 2012 comes around, Hunger Games is released, and it's an absolute smash hit. And it ticked a lot of boxes. It had a really strong cast. You had Woody Harrelson, Josh Hutcherson, Elizabeth Banks, and of course, Jennifer Lawrence in her breakout role as Katniss Everdeen. And she became a cultural icon. I mean, after this movie, pretty much everyone wanted to know how to use a bow and arrow and be a savage like Katniss. No one was really trying to learn how to bake bread like Peter. And the Hunger Games just had a really intriguing premise. A country divided into 12 districts based on their economic standing, and 2 kids from each district are picked randomly to compete to the death in a competition that basically shows the wealth inequality within this system. And it's for the entertainment for the rich and the upper class, and it's run by this, big bad government. And importantly, it just established a world that begged to be explored. Seeing the trailer, and even after watching the first movie, you wanted to know more. You wanted to know why these districts even existed. Why do the Hunger Games exist? And of course, it was full of action, excitement, and brutal violence of kids killing kids, which obviously sounds terrible to say, but I won't lie, as a kid, I was interested. Of course, there's also the romance element. There's a semblance of a love triangle here. Completely unnecessary, but it's there for all the romantics. And The Hunger Games, this movie was just a huge commercial success, and it's still one of Lionsgate's highest grossing films of all time. And of course, other studios saw how big of a hit this was and just jumped on the bandwagon. In 2014, you had Divergent come out, you had the first Maze Runner come out, and you had Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 1. All coming out in the same year. This is clearly an oversaturation of the same genre. But that in itself doesn't kill a genre. Just because there's lots of similar movies doesn't mean that the genre is dead. I mean, just look at superhero films. I swear one comes out every 6 weeks and people still love that shit. The concept in Divergent was that people were separated by 5 different personality traits. Being smart, being trustworthy, honest, and being peaceful, and some other stuff. They too also had a fairly good looking and stacked cast. I mean, Shailene Woodley and Ansel Elgort also that year starred in The Fault in Our Stars and blew up from that as well. So those things just sort of compounded each other. The main character, Triss, played by Shailene Woodley, she's special, she's unique, she's divergent. She doesn't fit into any of these categories. So basically, she's like the chosen one. And there's a big bad government oppressing people too. Surprisingly though, no love triangle in this one. And then you have Maze Runner. The concept in that film is that you've got a bunch of boys that are stuck in this place called the Glade, and they're surrounded by a maze that are filled with monsters. And they basically have these guys that are delegated maze runners that go out and try to map out the maze and find a way for them to escape. And this concept just had a lot of intrigue built into it. I mean, why were they in the maze? Like, who made the maze? Are they going to get out of the maze? And by the end of the first film, it ends on a pretty good cliffhanger that leads into a second film. And again, A solid and good-looking cast. The main character, Tom, played by Dylan O'Brien, he starts the movie not knowing who he is, but there's just something about him. He's part of this grander plan. And guess what? He's special. Something about him is unique. He might be the chosen one. And by the end of the film, it's revealed that the big bad government is oppressing them and putting them in these mazes. In this first film, there is no love triangle, but they save that for the second film. And so we start to see a lot of repetitive themes going on here. All the movies have to have a good looking cast, obviously, but I feel like that's just all movies, apparently. There's got to be some big bad government that's oppressing the people. And we don't really know that much about them. They're just dark and mysterious. They are bad. We're told they're bad. And they do give us a justification for why they're doing the things they're doing. Like, we get a justification for why the Hunger Games exist or why the maze exists. But when you really think about it, it just doesn't really make that much sense. You've got a protagonist who's the chosen one. There's something special about them, something unique, which just means one teenager is sort of leading the charge and leading this revolution against a totalitarian state, which is sort of hard to buy. I will say though that the character of Katniss Everdeen, she was fairly down to earth and relatable. It was really clear that she never thought of herself as special or the chosen one. She didn't do any of those things for glory or because she felt compelled. She just wanted to save her sister. And I think that's what really grounded her character and made her sort of the standout of all of these movies. And even the way they depict her, mental health deteriorating, even that's sort of realistic. I mean, all the other characters in the other films just go through all this traumatic stuff and they're just totally fine. Of course, you have good looking people, you've got to have some romance and love triangles here and there. But I mean, I can't really completely rag on this. If there's a teenage movie, it just feels like it just needs a bit of romance in it. Just what they do. But I think most importantly, the thing that's so similar is just the structure of the entire story of the series. You've got the first film, which is always pretty good. It's got a unique concept that's intriguing, brings us in, and we get to meet the characters, we learn to like the characters, and we want to learn more. So we watch the second movie. Second movie, we meet the rebels. Not much more. Third movie, they overthrow the government. And it just completely throws out that initial concept that anyone came to the movies to see. I mean, by the end of Maze Runner, it's got nothing to do with mazes, but they still got to smack a Maze Runner at the front of the title. But it's just a war, essentially, at that point. All the movies had really different concepts at the beginning that brought us into the cinema that first time and hooked us. But once it became clear that they all sort of devolve into the same thing, where it's just a revolution and a war against the big bad government, once people started to realize this, they just weren't gonna go and watch multiple movies to watch the same result just happen with different characters and different actors. It just wasn't compelling knowing that it all sort of ends up in the same place. Hunger Games Mockingjay did have an interesting take on the revolution and Katniss. Katniss wasn't just some unkillable hero that was just mowing through the opposition. It was more thoughtful in what was happening to her. She was sort of used as a prop for propaganda.
People of Panem, we fight, we dare, we...
Did she know the line?
And I found that really interesting in concept, but it just didn't come across in the movies. And I think this is because that final book was split into two films. That part one sort of just be about the propaganda piece just meant that nothing actually happened in that part. Harry Potter split its finale, The Deathly Hallows, into two films. That just gave all the other studios the idea that they should do the same thing. But it's just a completely different story. We literally grew up with Harry, Ron, and Hermione over more than a decade. But these dystopian teen movies were coming out once a year, and the books definitely did not justify the runtime of two full feature-length films. In 2015, the final Hunger Games film was released, and again, similar to the film before, it was a disappointing box office and critical reception. And Divergent, which was nowhere near as good as the Hunger Games films, they also tried to go for a two-parter finale and just ended up scrapping the second part entirely because of how poorly the first part did. So there literally is no part two to the finale of that series. And that's when the genre died. But wait, Hunger Games is back because they're releasing a prequel at the end of this year, so who knows? Teen dystopian films might see a revival. We'll just have to wait and see. Anyways, thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.